Hello everyone, welcome back to our afternoon presentations for Hit Points in History. Our next presenter is going to be Meghan Sullivan, and Meghan is here to talk to us today about how the underworld helps the gaming world, how the eschatological beliefs of the ancient Greeks can help game developers with world building. So Meghan, please approach the stage here, start sharing your content, and we'll let you take it away from there. And you can either double click on the lectern or use your arrow keys to move over there. There we go.
Okay, now can you hear me and see me?
We can hear you, we can see you, we can even see your slides.
Yay! There's never not a technical glitch with me. It comes with the territory. So hello, everyone. I hope you can still see the slide. Yes, okay. My name is Meghan Sullivan. I'm actually from the games industry side of things. I have a YouTube channel and a podcast called History in Games, which celebrates the educational power of video games. Today, my presentation is how the underworld helps the gaming world, how the eschatological beliefs of the ancient Greeks can help developers with world building. And I didn't put the entire title because it was messing up my visuals, man. One note, I want to see that chat pop off. I don't want you to guys just sit there quietly. I want you to shout out your favorite video games in ancient Greek and ancient Roman times and ancient Egyptian times. This is meant to be a fun as well as educational presentation. Despite the gloomy topic, I really want us all to have fun. But I foolishly only gave myself 15 minutes. So we're going to speed run the introduction so that we can get going here. All right, so let's see. Is this going to do anything or is this going to freeze on me? Oh, no, it would freeze on me, wouldn't it? Hold on just a second. Already we got another technical glitch here. Okay, there we go. Oh, fabulous. Okay, then I won't have to speed run the entire thing. Hoping to break a record, but we don't have to do that. All right, so yes, I won't be able to see the chat as I'm doing this presentation, but don't be shy. I am used to a rowdy gaming audience. You do not have to sit there quietly. You can flip a table. You can shout out your favorite video game of all time. That's what we're here for, people. It's a party. Okay, so if I go to the next slide, let me know if you guys can see this. This is, I'm going to play a sizzle reel from my YouTube channel, History and Games, and talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. So immediately you see WWE superstar Xavier Woods. He likes Greek mythology. I invite everyone to be on my show. Historians, pop culture people, developers, you're all invited on this show. But who am I? What am I doing here? Well, my name is Meghan Sullivan. I've worked in the games industry for almost 20 years. I've loved history and video games ever since I was a little girl. And I have done everything on the editorial side there is to do about video games. I've done reviews, previews, features, interviews, you name it, I've done it. I'm now on the consulting side of things, so I get early builds of video games, and I tell developers and publishers what works about their game and what could use some improvement. I studied history and games because I love video games, and I know a lot of people in the video game space who don't like history, and I want to prove to them that history can be a fun and exciting time, which we've been doing all throughout this weekend, proving to people how cool video games are. So for example, we've talked extensively today and yesterday about a fun game called Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And as you guys know, that game is all about being a royal Spartan mercenary running around the Peloponnesian War, brandishing the magical spear of Leonidas and trying to go after the bad guys. Well, aside from the magical spear, I actually proved to the audience how it's possible. There was a real royal Spartan mercenary running around the Peloponnesian War, and that's the kind of topic I like to do. Another example is the popular God of War franchise, which you see right here on your screen. That's from God of War 3. In that franchise, you play a very angry Spartan named Kratos. Kratos means power, who's on a vengeance spree against the gods who keep doing him wrong. And I explained to the audience that there really was an angry, so Kratos' nickname is Ghost of Sparta, the Ghost of Sparta. The way he gets that name is very Greek tragedy. But I explained to the audience there really was a very scary, angry ghost of Sparta that terrorized the Spartans into giving them a hero cult. In fact, there were many ghosts of Sparta because the Spartans wouldn't quit killing their kings. It was a bad habit of theirs. They also exiled like a dozen of them. I'm not exaggerating. So that's the kind of thing I like to teach in history and games. And if you're interested in a collaboration and want to learn more, come up to me later. Let's talk. I love doing collaborations with people and interviewing them. So if we go to the next slide, we're here today because the theme is world building, which can be challenging for developers, right? There's a lot that goes into world building. You got to think about the size of your world, right? Do you want it to be planets, like huge planets like Starfield and Mass Effect and No Man's Sky? You got to fill that world with cool things like terrain, tools, buildings, interesting characters, interesting enemies, and of course, the player avatar. You are either the hero, the protagonist. Sometimes you're the anti-hero, like Kratos in God of War. And sometimes it depends on what you do in the game. The choices you make will determine the ending and whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. And like in last year's smash hit, Baldur's Gate 3, shout out to that game. Okay, moving on. I'm going to skip these two things. Let's get to the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. Now, most of us are familiar with the gods of the upper air, right? The Olympians. We've read about them since we were little, right? Greek mythology books, and we saw Disney's Hercules and Clash of the Titans, you know, the good one, the 1981 one with Harry Hamlin. These are fun things, right? These gods were prayed to in the daylight. They had these high altars in front of their temples. You've probably seen their temples in movies and TV shows. You may have even been to their temples, like the Parthenon in Athens and the Oracle at Delphi. There were public sacrifices, communal meals, right? You would sacrifice animals to the gods and share a communal meal with them in the hopes of getting something really good from them. You prayed to them because Thanksgiving, gratitude, or again, you're trying to appeal to their better nature to give you something fun. They were so popular, you could name your kids after the gods. Artemisia comes from the goddess Artemis, for example. But what a lot of you scholars know and historians know, but a lot of people out in sort of the general public don't really know about are the chthonic beings, the underworld beings. They represent an invisible side of the Greek religion, one that was kind of taboo to talk about. So they didn't really, you had to kind of really look into Greek mythology and history to sort of see this side. These gods were actually all about averting, right? Keeping away evil. So they weren't worshipped in temples. They were worshipped in caves, sanctuaries that were partially built into the ground, tombs. There wasn't a communal meal. After the slaughtering of an animal, the whole victim would be given over to the god. Libations were poured directly into the earth or on a low altar or a trench or a hole in the ground to appease the spirits below. And you never named your kids after them. You didn't even call them by their real name half the time. You didn't want to anger them. So you would call them nice names in the hope of propitiating them, keeping them calm, not making them angry. So the wealthy one, the gentle one, the generous one, the kindly ones, the sweet one, shout out to Melanoy, those kind of names. If we go to the next slide, when we talk about the eschatological beliefs of the ancient Greeks, we've got a wide range here, which is good for developers. You can pluck from any of these time periods and take different beliefs and work with them. There's lots of flexibility here. So obviously, how the ancient Greeks of Mycenaean times in the late Bronze Age, how they felt about death and the afterlife is going to be very different than how, say, the Neoplatonists feel about the afterlife, or even cosmology. Neoplatonism is far out, man. It's a mix of science and philosophy and Greco-Egyptian magic. And it can be very different from other time periods. There are some through lines with all of this, right? But mostly what we're going to talk about today is the beliefs of the archaic and classical period. It's what most people sort of know, even if they're not that familiar with Greek mythology and history. And this is when the rise of hero cults, mystery cults, and different schools of philosophy start coming into play. All right, let's go to the next slide if it will let me. All right, so Underworld journey and locations. Well, this whole thing starts with one of the most powerful trio, which are the Fates, right? They were the personification of destiny. There were famously 3 sisters who spun out the fate of mortals. One spun the thread of life, one measured out a person's lifespan, and Atropos cut a person's thread when they came to the end of their life, right? They're very powerful. They're in Hesiod, they're in Homer, and they are often talked about in Greek mythology and history. And in video games, they can be bad guys or good guys. What I really like, though, is this is a screenshot from a game called Returnals. It came out in Returnal 2021 by Housemarque. This is a game where a Greek American goes into space and gets trapped on a planet called Atropos. And she keeps getting stuck in a time loop where she dies and comes back to life and dies and comes back to life. Atropos is the one who cuts your fate, and that's when your life ends. And Selena's trying to figure out what the heck is going on, how to get out of this fate loop. And it's very interesting. And I like that concept, taking the concept of one of the fates and quite literally making a whole planet out of it. I thought that was really interesting, right? So I encourage game developers to really think outside the box, right? In this case, a whole planet is the problem, not just a goddess or a being. Once your fate was cut, right? Your life thread was cut, you'd have an underworld guide to help you. So, well, first, proper burial is important, right? Your family had a duty. And after you died, they'd lay out your body for 2 or 3 days for viewing. Then they would give you a sumptuous funeral, right? Not too sumptuous. There were sumptuary laws in places like Athens because people turned a funeral into a big parade in which to show off the wealth of the living. So there were some laws that were like, hey, let's scale this back, people. This is supposed to be honoring the dead person, not the, rich living people. But once you died and you were properly buried, sometimes with a tiny, tiny coin called an obol or two, and maybe a honey cake, we'll talk about that later, someone would come to pick up your soul. Who it is depends on the time and the place. Sometimes it was a personification of death, Thanatos. He represented usually a normal or a gentle death. Much of the time, though, especially starting in the archaic and classical period, famously it was Hermes, the messenger god of the 12 Olympians. He's actually really cool. He's got multiple vocations, but his oldest and most important was probably that of Psychopomp, a guide of souls. He's actually a Bronze Age local god, so he's very, very old. I'll get back to Hecate in a moment, but then what happens is Hermes or Thanatos takes your soul to the underworld. In Hermes' case, he flits you over sometimes a great ocean and then drops you off at one of 2 rivers of the underworld. There are actually 5 rivers of the underworld, but usually Hermes takes you to the edge and you'll be dropped off either at the river Styx, Hatred, or the river of Woe. It sort of depends on the author, time and place, etc. Charon is the one who ferries your soul over that river to go to the gates of Hades. Charon's interesting. He's a little bit of a late comer in this story. He may not appear until coins appear in ancient Greece, which I want to say is not till like the late 7th century or sometime in the 6th century BCE. But shout out to Hecate. Hecate isn't as known, or usually she's mistaken as a goddess of witchcraft and ghosts, and that's not quite true. These things fall in her purview. She's really a goddess of physical and spiritual boundaries who guides divine beings, divine immortal beings with her torches, but she guarded physical as well as spiritual boundaries. So physical boundaries like city gates, like crossroads, doorways, things like that. But she could also guide people in the underworld with her torches. So whenever you see her in art, you usually see her with her torches. That's how you know it's Hecate. And we'll talk about how she got associated with ghosts and magic later. So witchcraft magic is actually associated with the underworld, not the upper air. So whether you're casting a love spell or a curse, you would write something on, say, a lead tablet, and you would throw it into a grave or a well, and you would pester ghosts to help you with your love life, because apparently they have nothing better to do. All right. So we have this picture of underworld guides. You see this white ground Lakythos, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, of Hermes and Charon, and one of the recently deceased who's being gently guided by the arm towards Charon. Notice that in that picture, Charon has an eye on his boat, perhaps to ward away evil. What's interesting about this is it's white, and this seemed to be very popular in mortuary objects. You could tell if they were white like this color, it's possible they were buried with people or used at the graveside to pour libations or oil or something to that effect. Now, what's interesting about these guides is their appearance changes over time. You can see here that Hermes in the center with his winged helmet is a mature man with a beard. But by late antiquity, he becomes a beardless, cutesy teenager. And so what's great is developers can use those changing descriptions and aspects of these gods to design their characters differently. And here's a great example. These are all depictions of these underworld gods from different games. Notice none of them look alike. So for example, on the far left, you've got Thanatos, the personification of death. He's not scary in the game he's in, which is Supergiant Supergiant's game Hades, which came out in 2018. It's a roguelike game. It's very popular. And in that game, not only is Thanatos a protagonist, he's also a dateable character, because of course he is. I love it. Next to him is Hecate. This is Hecate from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. She's not exactly an antagonist. She's kind of neutral in the game. It's hard to explain. You just got to play that DLC for yourself in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But notice her silvery hair, but her black outfit to represent the Underworld. Next to her in the pointy witch hat, which got unfortunately cut off here, is another version of Hecate. This is from the upcoming game Hades 2. She is a guide and mentor to the protagonist in that game, Melanoi. And Hecate, Melanoi, and Persephone all have a real connection in Greek mythology, which we can't get into here, but it's fascinating. And what I love is that Hecate, instead of being a scary witch, is seen in a positive manner. She's going to help you through the underworld. Sometimes Hecate is sort of the scary witch enemy in video games. And if you look in the very upper right-hand corner, that digitalized demon with a bikini, for some reason, is actually from the Shin Megami Tensei series. Hecate can cast spells on you and be an enemy, or she can be summoned into battle to help the protagonists. Very interesting there. We see another version of Thanatos. It's kind of that greenish gray, scary looking thing in the way background. This is Thanatos, I believe, from God of War Ascension. I think he is a boss, or if I remember correctly, the final boss in, no, not God of War Ascension. It's God of War Goes to Sparta, I think. And he is actually an antagonist in that game, and he looks very fearsome. Then you have to his right, Charon, just chilling from Hades as well, 2018's Hades. He's a friendly dude. You can actually befriend him. See, he's got his paddle. And he's just a really cool design. To the bottom right, you finally have another version. You have one version of Hermes from Immortals Phoenix Rising. He's a smart alecky character who helps guide you through the game. And in the very background with the flaming hair, you actually have Hermes from Assassin's Creed. God of War 3. And you have to chase him around and beat him up in that game. And he's really hard to catch. And because he is a messenger, because he has a very silver tongue, he has some cutting words for Kratos in that game. Moving on, during the tech demo, I was told to keep this picture of a very good boy. This is Cerberus. Once you are taken over the river Styx, or the river of woe, you are greeted by a big giant gate of Hades, and guarding it is Cerberus, or Kerberos, traditionally depicted with 3 heads. He can have 50 or 100, but usually 3 heads. He's the 3-headed hound of the underworld that guards the gate of Hades. And according to the 8th century poet Hesiod, he is a very good boy who is actually happy to see you when you first arrive in the underworld. He'll wiggle his tail, he'll perk up his ears, he'll bark happily. It's when you try to leave that he gets angry and will eat your soul if you try to escape and go back out. He also doesn't like intruders, right? If you're alive and you're not supposed to be there, he will try to attack you. And sometimes you have to distract him with a honey cake. And sometimes people would give a honey cake just to stay on his sweet side as they pass through the gates of Hades. I love doggies, so I'm happy to talk about him. Here we have 2 interesting depictions of Cerberus. Now, Cerberus, mostly in video games, is an antagonist. He's something that you have to get past to get an object or to get through a door because he's a guard dog. But I wanted to give a shout out to these 2 versions of Cerberus. On the left, you have Cerberus in a game called Smite. It's a massive online battle arena game, and you can actually play as Cerberus with cool powers. And then on the right, you have Cerberus from Hades again. And in this game, he's a protagonist, and you can pet the doggy. He just lies by Hades' side looking very, very cute. And I love they do totally different depictions of Cerberus. He doesn't have to look the same. He can look fearsome, or he can look kind of doofy like in Hades. And you see the diverse ways that you can depict these underworld beings. There's so many to choose from to put in your world. I love it. Then, of course, you get through the gates of Hades and you meet the rulers of the underworld, Hades and Persephone. Persephone was famously kidnapped by her uncle and forced to be his queen during the winter months, along with her mother, Demeter. She was a powerful vegetation goddess that gave mortals hope in the afterlife. So mystery cults often featured Persephone. Why? Because she's a goddess of rebirth. She's taken to the underworld during the winter months and comes back in spring. So a cycle of death and rebirth. Her sterner husband, Hades, he's solemn and stern, but he's never depicted as evil. In video games, he's often the evil final boss or a major boss you have to get past to escape or get into the underworld. But in fact, he wasn't evil, and according to Orpheus, he was even a chthonic aspect of Zeus. Zeus was the protector of Xenia, of hospitality and guest friendship, which was a hugely important diplomatic tool in the Greek world. And so, like Zeus, Hades was actually a gracious host. He was the host of mortals, right? And so he rarely got like too angry at people, but he would sometimes trick them into staying into the underworld. But he was mostly pretty gracious. I love these depictions of Hades. They're totally different from each other. You've got Hades from the game Hades. In the background, you have a scarier antagonistic Hades from Final Fantasy XIV. Next to him, with a scary-looking helmet and the hooks, you have Hades from God of War 3. The pretty boy sort of in the center right is actually from a game called Kamigami no Asobi, which is a romance simulator where you can romance the gods of the Greek pantheon. Of course, Hades is the emo kid, but he'll take you stargazing if you go on a date with him. Next to him is Hades in the mob simulator game Oklos. You do have to fight him, but the thing that I love about this design is that Hades has glasses and he looks very grandfatherly, which I thought was great. It totally subverted my expectations about Hades. And then you see two different depictions from Hades, one from Kingdom Hearts 2, that's the Disney version of Hades, and then the summon from Final Fantasy 7. You also have different ways of looking at Persephone. In the center, you have the protagonist Persephone from the game Persephone, which is a little indie puzzle game that came out a couple of years ago. Very cute. To the right, you have Persephone from Hades. She's a maternal figure, a vegetation goddess, obviously. And then to the left, you have the one in the white dress is Persephone from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and the one on the left is Persephone in God of War, Chains of Olympus. I like her depiction in Chains of Olympus because she's very angry. She's angry with her lot. She doesn't want to be in the underworld and even tries to destroy it, and you as Kratos have to fight her. She's a tough boss fight, by the way. But you can see, again, these different depictions of her according to people's imagination. Do you imagine her as a spring goddess or more like a goddess of the underworld? Or does she just represent the cycle of death and rebirth, like in the game Persephone? And then, of course, you get in front of the judges of the underworld. If you're not directly judged by Hades and Persephone, you're judged by one of these three gentlemen, famously. And I can never pronounce their names correctly. So Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Icarus. They would decide your ultimate fate in the afterlife. I'm going to hurry along because of time. But I love the depiction of the three judges in video games. In the center, you see a picture of the three judges as sort of these mechanical statues that first help Kratos and then sort of turn against him. And then that funky being to the right is Rhadamanthus in Persona 2, Innocent Sin. You can actually summon him into battle, and it's got a futuristic look, but he will take care of your enemies with the Sword of Judgment. And I just love the depiction of the judges of the underworld, how diverse that is, and how developers really think outside the box with these characters. Once it was decided that you are either good, bad, or meh, you end up famously in one of the three realms of Hades. Now, the idea for everyone was to get to Elysium. This was the original VIP afterlife party, right? It was the ultimate after party. But it was really hard to get into. You had to know someone, you had to be related to a god, or you had to be the ultimate warrior, the ultimate hero to get in there. Likely, you had to be a really bad sinner initially to get into Tartarus. This is where people went when they fought or offended the gods. So the Titans, the giants, and then mortals like Sisyphus, who try to cheat death, or Ixion, who try to rape a goddess, so forth and so on. But initially, it was also very hard to get into. Most of us end up in the meadows of Asphodel. This was the office party of the afterlife. It was really drab. It was really boring. You kind of had to be there, and you drank to forget. And most people, when they were in the meadows of Asphodel, were required to drink from the river Lethe, which was a river of forgetfulness. And you can see the 5 rivers are mentioned here, and I cannot pronounce them correctly to save my life, but the Styx, the Lethe, the Acheron, the Phlegethon, and the Cocytus rivers. All right. If you were super lucky, you would attain apotheosis. You would actually rise up to hang out with the gods in Olympus, and you could avoid death altogether. But this was really reserved for just semi-divine beings like Heracles, Dionysus, Asclepios, etc. However, you could attain some immortality or get a VIP ranking in the underworld 2 different ways starting the archaic and classical periods. You could either join a mystery cult, which promised initiates a happy afterlife through a series of secret rituals and spells and stuff like that. And then there were hero cults. You didn't even have to pull an Achilles. You didn't have to be the ultimate warrior. Sometimes you'd get a hero cult if you died in a really weird manner, like you were struck by lightning, or you died unhappily and your angry ghost was terrorizing people and you terrorized them into giving you a hero cult. And we'll talk about the angry dead in just a second. These are different depictions of the underworld. Assassin's Creed Odyssey on the upper left-hand corner, that's the Elysium Fields. Then there is Tartarus on the lower left-hand corner from Hades. On the upper right, it's not exactly the Meadows of Asphodel, but you have this gloomy kind of meh afterlife in a game called Apotheon. That's a really fun game, side-scrolling action game. I encourage people to check it out. And then the bottom right-hand corner, a totally different depiction of Tartarus. Rather than being underground, it's actually a tower that juts up into the air. And this is from Persona 7. Oh, I'm sorry, Persona 7. Sorry, this is from Shin Megami Tensei Persona 3 retold. And I love these 2 different depictions of Tartarus next to each other. One in red, one in green, one underground, one actually above ground. You can subvert people's expectations as a developer by doing something a little different. There are also the primordial beings and early gods, right? These weren't always necessarily worshipped, although they are acknowledged. So they're the personification of natural phenomenon, night, death, doom, fate, etc. You see that here. And then these characters can be antagonists, protagonists, or even a player avatar in the game. So I want to run this video from a game called Nyx Quest, Kindred Spirits. It's a really sweet, adorable platforming game in which Nyx, the personification of night, is actually a good girl. She's very sweet. She's looking for her good friend Icarus, and she has to sort of traverse these ruined lands to do so. It's a very pretty sweet game. I highly recommend it. You can play it on Steam right now. And then in the left-hand corner, you see 2 different versions of Nyx as well. Nyx from Hades, a maternal figure, and then an antagonistic version of Nyx, a final boss, if you will, in Persona 3. So different ways of depicting these beings. It doesn't always have to be antagonistic. They can be a hero, like in Nyx Quest, or they can be a helper, like in Hades. All right, and then of course we've got the famous Furies, and they're almost always antagonists in video games. These Furies are often dressed as the kindly ones, the Eumenides or the Eumenides, but they're really known as the Furies, and they are goddesses of vengeance. They're known to terrorize those who commit murder or break oaths. They're pretty famous, so I don't have to explain a whole lot about them here, but I wanted to show you some cool video footage from the very first game that the Furies appear in, which is an obscure Atari 2600 game called No Escape. In that game, you play as Jason, you're stuck in a temple, and you have to get out before the Furies get you. And the only way to defeat the Furies is to throw rocks at the temple roof and have a piece of it fall down on a Fury, like you just saw there. If you hit the Furies, they pull a Hydra, and they actually split into 2. So you don't want to hit them directly. But I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to show you guys. There's also a depiction of Megara from Hades, and to the right of her is Alecto from God of War Ascension. You can see that none of these depictions are the same. They can be very scary, or they can be, very helpful. Sometimes they were worshipped in fertility rites to help people with a good crop or protect the city-state from evil. And then you're actually not alone in the afterlife, whether you're in Elysium or the fields of Asphodel. You're joined by heroes, right? People think heroes all ascend to Olympus. They actually don't. Most end up in the afterlife. I know you guys as scholars know that, but a lot of people actually don't know that outside of academia. And these heroes were initially all demigods, right? And they were the focus of either Pan-Hellenic or local worship as part of the cult of the dead. Many local communities kept the bones of heroes in their city-state. Athens and Sparta are a great example of that, right? Sparta went to go get the bones of Orestes, and Athens went to go get the bones of Theseus from nearby places, so that they could claim those lands as their own, but also bring back home the bones of heroes to protect their own city-state as well. If you've ever read a book called The First Fossil Hunters by Adrienne Mayer, it's a fantastic book, and she has a great theory that these bones that were brought back from faraway lands were real, and they probably belonged to prehistoric animals mistaken as big giant humans that must have been heroes. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it. This picture is actually one that I took at the Getty Villa Museum in Malibu. I highly recommend going there. And obviously it's Theseus killing the Minotaur. So that's very cool. And here's all the different ways that heroes are depicted. Sometimes they're heroic, like in Kingdom Hearts 2, you see Disney's Hercules in the background there. Sometimes they are antagonistic. So on the far left, you see Theseus from Hades. He looks very heroic, but he's a pompous idiot in that game, and I love wailing on him. As you try to get out of the underworld, he's one of the people who block you, and he actually is in Hades in one of those levels. In the center is Jason from Rise of the Argonauts, a 2018 PlayStation 3 game that was a little bit janky, but they tried to represent Jason as best it could. Behind him, though, is Perseus. Perseus is an antagonist in God of War 2. He is actually voiced by Harry Hamlin from the original Clash of the Titans movie. I love that. He's a hilarious antagonist, but he's pretty tough to beat. And then finally, we have Achilles from Total War Saga Troy. And you can play as him in order to beat up the Trojans. So that's a strategy game that's pretty cool as well. And you notice that they were all depicted very differently, which is very cool. Then you have angry ghosts, and just ghosts in general. Oftentimes they actually weren't in the underworld. They hovered between worlds. They were unhappy souls that existed between planes. They couldn't join the dead, but they couldn't join the living. So they are often people who died violently before their time or didn't receive proper burial. They often had to be propitiated with a number of purification rites or even given a hero cult to appease their angry ghost. So a good example is the famous King Leonidas. His nephew Pausanias had a very strange rise and fall. He actually was the victor of Plataea, the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE over the Persians. It was the last major land battle in Greece that took place between the two sides. And Pausanias was the leader and thus victor of Plataea, but also had 3 more spectacular victory over the Persians and their Greek allies. So once at the Siege of Thebes, once in Cyprus, and once in, I almost said Constantinople, Byzantium. And he was very popular, but he had a strange death. He was accused of eventually turning over to the Persian side. The Spartans tried to starve him to death in a temple because they couldn't directly kill him. Pausanias was a suppliant. He was in that temple to escape his enemies who were determined to get rid of him, probably because he knew too much or was on some secret assignment for the Spartans and he wasn't supposed to get caught. It's a whole story. But when he dies, his angry ghost haunts the Spartans, and the oracle at Delphi, after a major tongue lashing, tells them, give this guy a hero cult and his ghost will stop messing with you. Because ghosts had all sorts of crazy powers. They could send plague, pestilence, earthquakes. They could do all sorts of scary things to you. So obviously angry ghosts would be a spectacular antagonist to put in your gaming world, right? I'm going to play this video, maybe. And these angry ghosts, obviously Kratos, the angry ghost of Sparta, but also 2 ghosts from a game that actually initially doesn't have anything to do with Greek mythology, although it has mythological figures in it from Greek mythology, is Final Fantasy X, one of my favorite games of all time. There are 2 angry ghosts known as Unsent in that game. One is an antagonist, and he's the blue-haired guy in the left corner of your screen. That's Maester Seymour. He's very angry with the world and wants to destroy it because he thinks everyone will be out of pain that way. Orin is also spoiler alert, an angry ghost. He's an unsent. But rather than try to destroy the world, he wants to stop the cycle of death from continuing in the world of Spira. There's a lot of rites about propitiating and appeasing angry ghosts in that game in order to get out of the cycle of death and people getting hurt and even killed by these ghosts. And it's really a fascinating game. So these are different takes on angry ghosts, right? Kratos is a big vengeance machine. He's always angry. And so that's kind of easy to understand. And then finally, I'm going to wrap this up real fast. So finally, attributes and symbols of Hades that you can put in your world as objects. Helm of Darkness, obviously very famous. Hades had a cap of invisibility or a helmet of invisibility, which he rarely wore himself. He was already part of the invisible world, but he would graciously lend out to Athena, to Perseus, to help them with their adventures. And items like torches and keys, both of which happen to be in the domain of Hecate, again, who was a goddess of physical and spiritual boundaries. So she guarded city gates, thus the key was her emblem, but also guided people through the underworld. Thus torches were also her early emblem. And every game has torches and keys to get through dungeons and darkness and everything. But one game that caught my attention was an obscure 1989 game called Myth. It's a text adventure game, and the whole point of the game is you are Poseidon, and you're trying to steal the cap of invisibility or the helmet of invisibility from Hades. And it's this huge text adventure game. And I thought that was really interesting, a really interesting angle. Your whole purpose, objective in that game is to steal the helmet of invisibility. And you build a world and build a story around that, which I thought was really cool. Okay, I suck at citations, so I'm just going to be real honest about that. I do recommend, however, if you want to learn more about these things, I'm hugely indebted to Professor Sarah Iles Johnston, whose book Restless Dead, Encounters Between the Living and the Dead in Ancient Greece was a huge resource. And she's also kind enough to come on History and Games last year and talk about the Restless Dead, Hecate, and Angry Ghosts. Also, Paul Cartledge is very famous for all of his stuff on Sparta. So Pausanias' ghost story, a lot of the history comes from his work. Adrienne Mayer, her work about the first fossil hunters, et cetera, and of course, all of the ancient resources as well. You know their names: Aristophanes, Aristotle, Homer, Herodotus, Thucydides. And then these are all my video game resources, which there are too many to go over here. So I am sorry, I just didn't give myself enough time to really go more in depth, but I want you to see the diversity of the characters and places and ideas that you can get from the underworld, just the Greek underworld alone, to build a world around. Okay, questions, comments, suggestions, let's get them. And I will stop. I don't know if I should stop sharing this screen or not. Whoop.
Howdy, fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you play Stray Gods?
People keep asking me that question, and I'm like, I haven't gotten to it yet. I swear I will, because everyone recommends that game. I just haven't had time, but I've seen the trailer for it. It looks really excellent. Everyone insists that I play that game. Ironically, of the gazillion games I've played about ancient Greece, I still haven't gotten to that one yet. It's been a busy year and a half in video games. So I promise I will, though. I know of it.
Hey Megan, that was a lot of fun. I I have a couple of things as usual. The first is that we should totally talk about collabing sometime because that sounds fun. I also I was wondering as you're going through what you think about the because we've saw yesterday Kate's presentation on how mummies get this range from like disgusting to sexy, and as someone on the video game side, I'm sure you have thought a lot about overly sexualized representations. So I was wondering if you had any commentary on the sort of sexified chthonic deities.
Yes, funny that you saw that picture of Persephone, right? You saw one picture of her in a black dress and like an open back, and it's clearly aimed at the male demographic, right? Like God of War was created by, I'm gonna blank on his name, but the pitch for God of War was actually if Clash of the Titans was directed by Paul Verhoeven, and it was meant to be a sexy, bloody, over-the-top action series, clearly aimed at the 18 to 35 demographic. So all these gods and goddesses are often, especially the goddesses, are meant to be sexy and cool, really for the male gaze, right? Really, these goddesses are not depicted in a battle bikini in actual Greek art, right? There's something where you always have to make them sexy because there's still a lot of men in the industry and they still need to have goddesses be gorgeous and powerful. Because when you think goddess, everyone thinks that every goddess is Aphrodite, right? She's got to be hot. She's got to be there for the male gaze. As things go on, though, it gets better as more female developers and the POC community and the LGBTQI community start coming in. Happily, we're starting to slowly see that change. So if you look at Cassandra, some of her outfits are a little questionable in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But for me, as a woman, it was so refreshing to play as a female character who could kick butt and take names. I really appreciated that and enjoyed it. And so it's still, you're right, it's still very predominant and problematic. Especially in the Japanese gaming space, where they're a little behind on these things. But slowly but surely, when you take a look at Celine from Returnal, you see that she is a straightforward, serious astronaut, that she's not there for the male gaze. She's there to figure out a crazy mystery. So could be better, slowly getting better. Hopefully more women in the gaming space will help with that.
Yeah. The other question I had was, can you say the name of that that visual novel again, the one where you get to date Greek gods? Because I think I need to
Yes,
look that up.
excellent question. I totally understand. So it's called Kamigami no Asobi. So like God's Playground or God's Play in Japanese. You can basically just try to Google jujitsu it and be like Greek god dating game Japan, and then Hades, and he should come up as the pretty emo boy. And who else can you date? I think Hermes, Apollo. There's a whole pantheon of wonderful gods, and of course, like I said, Hades is the emo kid, but he will take you stargazing. It's very sweet. I'm just saying. Also, feel free to come up to the mic and just shout out your favorite Greek-related video game.
Well, for that, it's going to be the Forgotten City, even though that's more Roman.
That's okay. The Romans were influenced by the Greeks. Anyone out, come shout out your favorite game. Let's do it, people. This is interactive. I'm used to a rowdy Twitch stream, so you can't surprise me with anything. I do myself want to shout out one of the earliest games that I found about Greek mythology was a 1980 PC game called Labyrinth, where you go to the center of a maze to kill the Minotaur with a lightsaber because it's 1980 and it's Star Wars.
Well, most recently, Stray Gods.
Man, I got to get on this one.
Yeah, but I actually really like the Total War Rome and the strategy behind that. I didn't do the Troy expansion, but I should try that out.
Yeah, hopefully it's on. Was it on sale recently? I'm not sure if it's still on sale now, but you might want to check that out. Don't hear anything. Oh, they're typing a question. All right. Okay. I didn't quite hear that part. Yeah. But don't be shy, people. Celebrate your favorite games with me. It's a party. I've had so much fun this weekend. You guys are awesome.
And as we're waiting for them to type their answer, I will share a non-video game favorite of mine, which is a bit of a slant, but the D&D Mythic Odyssey of Theros, which is very much a Greek mythology expansion.
That's awesome. I can never find a tabletop group to join. They're always in the middle of a campaign. So I've technically never played D&D because every time I want to join a group, they're right in the middle of a campaign.
Well,
the only tabletop game well, go ahead.
I was gonna say a biased recommendation is try out some one shots. Myself and Samantha Supes ran some games last night, so.
I know I came in too late. I was at a birthday party, an early birthday soiree, and I came in at the tail end of it, and I was sad I missed it.
There's one tonight too, if you want to go.
All right. Well, I actually have another event to get to, but I will try. I will try to come back and do that as well. I want to be part of this.
And hey, now you know people who do one shots, so.
Yeah.
Building your network
awesome.
there. Alan, I do see you approach the mic. We'll get to your question in just a moment. But first, I want to call out Yam's question that was typed out. So I was going to ask, I noticed a lot of depictions of Greek gods in video games noticeably tend to not be very culturally Greek. And I was wondering what your opinion on that in a modern setting or ancient one.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We kind of share because Greek mythology has just been around forever and it's been so popular. It does tend to be, I don't know if appropriated is the right word, but culturally appropriated from other people, and they get less and less like the Greeks and like their original depictions. And sometimes that's good, you use your imagination, and other times it's like, well, you're getting far away from the actual source material here. It would be great to see more Greek developers come out and talk about their history and how it affects them. Even today, there are still certain superstitions and beliefs in Greece pertaining to the chthonic beings I just talked about. So there are many entrances to Hades all around Greece, and people still avoid them because it's a little scary, right? There's the famous oracles of the dead at, northwestern Greece at Ephyra, and in the southern part in the Peloponnese. There's even one in Italy and Turkey and North Africa, so right all around the Mediterranean. And people are still a little superstitious about those things. And I'd be curious to know how Greek developers incorporate those beliefs even today in their culture. It's an excellent point.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, jumping back to the sexification in the male gaze, I'm been curious about the reverse. I mean, male avatars have always been, to an extent, buffed up, beefed out, bare chests and whatnot. But I feel like, especially with Zagreus is an excellent example, there's a bit more of male characters being pushed into that thirst trap territory. And I've always wondered how that factors in as a mirror to the many, many problems with the male gaze for female characters, and whether it's a problem or a good thing that the males are being objectified in the same way, um, given the long history of agency, power, and all the doing shit stuff that the male characters have typically done.
Right. So one thing we sort of have to clarify though is with a lot of games, bare chested men running around is a power fantasy. It's not necessarily the same sort of, you're not really being quite as leery and pervy about it, because a lot of these games are made for men by men, and often that's a power fantasy. Woo, I'm Kratos, and he gets to be with all the sexy girls and he gets to rip things apart. I mean, his very name means power, right? Whereas the thing about Hades is it's a thirst trap for everyone. That was the idea. It was to make the character bisexual, and you can date anyone. You can date two people at once in either minds. So that's supposed to be sort of empowering. Everyone in that game is sexy, but it's fair play, right? Like in this case, everyone's thirsty. That was kind of the objective in the first place. It's kind of the idea of Hades. I think the developers actually talk about just making them really sexy and fun for everyone. So everyone feels included. And you even have, sort of either non-binary characters, or they don't necessarily want a romance, but they want a friendship. So Dusa, short for Medusa, is a great example of that. So it can be a slippery slope, right? Like you don't want men to be, part of that female gaze. You don't want them to be objectified like that either. But in Hades' case, it's really about everyone gets to have fun. But it's a good question to raise. Like we don't want to swing too far the other way either, right? We want these things to have proper context. So that's a good point. And hopefully it won't slide in the wrong direction. Hopefully it'll be a little more equal. Either everyone is equally sexy and everyone gets fun, or everyone has to be strong and powerful.
I mean, I don't mind too much of a slide for the gay gays, as it were, but for my own benefit. But I like what you said about Hades doing it intentionally in such a way that it includes people rather than is exclusionary or icky.
Yeah, they don't play up the gay angle for laughs, right? You can date Thanatos and it's not played for laughs. It's actually very sweet, and I love that. More celebration of games, more questions. And if we're running out of time, you can find me afterwards. I'll be just sort of hanging around, happy to talk to you guys about trading YouTube links and whatnot and how to find each other. Do not be shy. I'm from the games industry. No one's shy here.
I just want to call. We had another question come in on the chat. Are there any other underworlds you are a fan of, learned about, exploring games, etc.?
Ooh, what a great question. I think the Egyptians have that on lock, right? Like a lot of Greek beliefs about the underworld came obviously, and many of you have done fantastic presentations about this already, but from ancient Mesopotamia, from ancient Egypt. You can see those influences somewhere. And then starting the Hellenistic era, of course, you've got that syncretism of Greek and Egyptian gods, which leads to Greco-Egyptian magic. But the ancient Egyptian underworld was, full of magic and rules and stories, not just the Book of the Dead, but the pyramid texts. They go back thousands of years, and there are magic spells on the walls of these tombs. And they've got a whole plethora of judges down there and rulers of the underworld. And, Ma'at will judge your heart. Is it light as a feather? Is it heavy? Does it get eaten? Do you go into oblivion, or do you go to I forget what it's called, the reeds of something, reeds of paradise? I can't think of what it's called right now. Somebody shout it out in the chat. I know you know. But I love that idea of the underworld, because the Egyptians seem like they're obsessed with death, but they're obsessed with life, right? They want to live forever. And because they did such a good job with that, we know the names of pharaohs thousands of years later. So in a way, they did achieve immortality.
Hey, just wanted to pop in. I'm sorry I missed like most of your talk. I was doing a work Zoom, so I will have to go back and catch the beginning. But since it seems like everyone's kind of just talking about their favorite Underworld games and stuff, yeah, I just had this really fun question pop into my head, and I'm like, man, if you could go and take any mythology's Underworld and turn it into a musical, what would you do?
Well, somebody did. That was, of course, Hades Town, which I still haven't gotten a chance to see live, but everybody loves it. Um, so I would actually really like to do that. I think that like maybe doing Egypt could also be really fun, or even Mesopotamia. You have all sorts of things that you can work with. Sometimes the underworld is portrayed in a humorous way, like Aristophanes' frogs, right? Which almost kind of gives away the games with mystery cults, which we didn't get a chance to touch on that much in this presentation. But the idea of making a trip to the underworld and trying to get an ancient playwright to come back because plays suck at the end of the 5th century BCE, according to Aristophanes. Again, frogs is really kind of funny and played up for laughs. So that would actually be like a fun musical or something fun to do.
Well, that, and then since you're all about underworlds, I'm like, you got to get yourself to the Necromanteon over in Epirus in Greece, and then take a picture of yourself next to the door to the underworld. That would be a great photo that I feel like you need.
I would love to do that. I want to make a second trip to Greece. So I did the kind of like history tour of like Athens, Delphi, Olympia, all of that, but I didn't get to Sparta because no one wanted to go to Sparta and I was grumpy. And then I want to go to places like that where like, here's an entrance to the underworld. Here's a cave to the underworld, right? Of course, I am superstitious and already spooked out by those things. I don't know if I'd be brave enough to go in them.
Okay, I tried to break into the underworld and make my own Calabasas, but that didn't work because I like knocked on that damn thing and was like, "What me?" and silence. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Only Heracles and Orpheus and a couple others got to make a Calabasas going down. That was reserved for heroes. But I love that you tried. You did try.
I did, and my dad documented me trying. He like took a video of me being like banging on the door, like begging them to let me in. But it's great.
That's hilarious. Eventually we'll all get there one day, but hopefully we'll all see each other in Elysium, right? We gotta figure out the secret password to get into that part of the underworld. Maybe after being reborn a couple of times. Sometimes the Orphics and other mysteries believe that you had to be reborn a few times before you can make it in. But maybe we'll be like the Neoplatonists and we'll, figure out a way to go back to the world of the great mind. I don't know. There's all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah, like I like the idea. I don't know if I'd like it so much in practice, but maybe I would. I don't know. We'll see.
Hopefully it won't be a long time before any of us find out.
Yeah,
like this.
But it sounds like an interesting thing to explore.
Exactly.
I just want to call out a lively discussion and fun goofs in the chat. Thank you all for contributing there. We've got scams, we've got Anna Sear, we've got scarabs being sold to scratch out your heart. All kinds here at Hit Points in History, so thank you all for that. I'm going to take a quick peek here just to make sure that no one else is approaching the mic that we're forgetting about here. And yeah, maybe just a minute or so here for another question before we get our next speaker ready for their presentation. So are there any other final questions or comments for Meghan Sullivan?
I got a question for you guys. Have you been having a good time? Yeah?
Woo!
Do a dance if you heard that. Yeah, love it. Love seeing those dances. Glad you guys are having a blast. I know I am.
Well, in our next starting hour here, we have still just a little bit more content left here in day 2 of Hit Points in History before we also get to Hit Points in History After Dark for those who have the time to join us for some games and their libations. But in the 4 o'clock hour here, Central Time, we're going to be having 2 things go on. The first is we're going to have a reveal for the ARG walkthrough. So you'll be having an option to watch that. It is a pre-recorded thing, so you can watch it later on. And in addition, we are going to be having a live Let's Play by our very own Julie Levy here. Now, Julie, if you want to keep it a surprise, we can let them keep waiting here, or if you want to reveal what game you'll be playing.
Well, by the vote, seems like we have got Heaven's Vault on deck, since that's what I talked about yesterday. No surprises there. So I am just booting that up now. Ready to go whenever you are. I didn't manage to figure out how to do 2 cameras, so once I start playing you will just see the game, but you'll still hear me.
Well, we can still work with that. So we will go ahead and I'll end this recording here for future watchers, and we'll get you all set up for yours, Julie.